Okay? Yeah? Okay. Thank you very much, Sly. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and thank you to everybody for the opportunity to be here today to speak to you about both the work of the Pew Hispanic Center, but also young Latinos in the United States. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories today, a demographic story, a story about young Latinos, and a little bit about sort of what we know about trends in terms of graduate students, graduate enrollment, and actually young people getting graduate degrees. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about the Pew Hispanic Center, because it's important to have the Pew Hispanic Center and what we do in some perspective, because there's some things that we do and some things that we, as required by our funder, are unable to do. So let me tell you a little bit about the center. We've been around for about 10 years, and the center was established by a journalist named Roberto Soto, who's actually a professor at University of Southern California right now in the Annenberg School. But what's interesting about this is that we were established by a journalist, and the Pew Hispanic Center is part of something called the Pew Research Center, which is also a collection of centers just like Pew Hispanic, all founded by journalists. In fact, the president and CEO of Pew Research is himself a former journalist. Now, why that's important is because it gives you some sense of the type of work that we do. Our work is social science research. We do public opinion surveys, we do demographic analysis. However, we call ourselves a fact tank as opposed to a think tank. And what I mean by that is, I know it's kind of funny. What I mean by that is that we talk about the facts, we present information, but we never make policy recommendations. So today, if I get a question about, so Mark, what should we do? I might say, I don't know. And that's only because at the Pew Hispanic Center we take no positions on policy. But that doesn't mean we don't ask questions and public opinion surveys about policy, or it doesn't mean that we don't look at questions that might be related to policy. So with that said, let me tell you a little bit about what we know about Latinos. First, last fall we did a survey of Hispanics. And in that survey we asked them, what are the top issues for somebody like you? And when we asked that question, we asked them to rate each one of these issues in terms of importance. And this is the share of Latino registered voters who said that these issues were extremely important to them personally. Number one was education. Number two, jobs. Number three, healthcare. Those three issues have been the top three issues, jostling for position, depending on the year. But those have been the top issues that we have seen among Hispanic registered voters, in fact, all Hispanics, for the last 10 years or so. You'll notice that immigration is also very important. 31% of Latinos have cited it as extremely important to them, but it is not an issue that ranks above education, healthcare, or jobs. Now, of course, that doesn't mean immigration isn't important. Given all the debate about immigration, immigration is a very important issue for many Latinos, and it shapes how they vote. Nonetheless, when we ask about issues, top issue is education. Now, that is of course important because one of the things about Latinos that you'll notice is that it's a relatively young population. And when we talk to young Latinos, and okay, I think my PowerPoint is misbehaving. Yes, something happened, oh boy. Okay, well, I don't know what happened to my PowerPoint, but it seems to have freaked out a little bit. I am sorry. Okay, well, I think what we will do is I will just have to remember everything off the top of my head. So if something looks a little funny up here, I'll try to point it out. And that last slide, you'll notice, was a little funny. So what I wanted to start with, I wanted to talk to you about young Latinos and what share are they of the general U.S. population before I get to this slide. Generally, in the United States, about 16% of the U.S. population is of Hispanic background. When you look at young people ages 16 to 25, they represent 18% of that population. When you talk about young people of school-going age, they represent 1 in 5 of the nation's public school students. When you talk about newborns in the United States, across the country, 1 in 4 of all newborns are of Latino origin. So we're seeing a growing Latino youth or a young population. Now, when we ask Hispanic young people, how do they feel about their futures? One of the things that comes out is that they're very optimistic. One, they're satisfied with their lives, and two, 3/4 of them expect to be better off than their parents financially. So a lot of optimism among young Latinos. We also find that not only is education a top issue for Hispanic registered voters, but among Latinos, whether adults or young people, they're actually more likely to say a college education is necessary for success in life than the general U.S. population. So a lot of optimism, a belief in education among Latinos. When you ask a Latino, okay, this is another slide that is messed up, so please excuse my slides being messed up. You're seeing some early stuff here. But in terms of what Latino parents said their children should do after high school, the number one thing, and it's not this slide, the number one thing was go to college. 7 in 10 of Hispanic young people said that was what their parents said that they should do first. So a real belief in both education as an issue, as in college education is important for success in life, and a real sense that their parents are pushing young Latinos to go to college. Okay. Everything is a little bit, okay. My apologies for this slide. I don't know what happened. It must have been the move from 2003 to 2007. So please forgive my PowerPoint presentation here. Wait a minute. I think I could. Do you guys mind if I try to open up a different file? Because I think I have it as a PDF as well. And this might actually work. Nope, I don't have it as a PDF. Okay. So, my apologies. Let's try this one here. No, this one isn't it. Okay, all right. Well, I'm just going to go back to what we had here. My apologies, folks. So now, one of the other things that's clear about young Latinos is that their educational, let's see, these are all not matching. Okay. My sincerest apologies. I'm just going to keep talking. So, importance of college education. Education is an issue. Parents pushing their child to go to college. Yet when you ask young Latinos, how far in school do you want to go? They're less likely to say that they want to get a college degree, less likely to say they want to get a graduate degree than the general population of young people. So when you're taking a look at young Latinos overall, real belief in education, yet their educational expectations lag. They're also, among 16 to 25-year-olds, less likely to be enrolled in school. So when we talk about young Latinos, a lot of belief in education, but less likely to be actually engaging in or going to school. So, in a public opinion survey, we asked young Latinos, well, why is that? Why aren't you currently enrolled in school? And the number one reason that they gave to us for not being enrolled in school was they need to support family. 72% of young Latinos said that that was the number one reason why they were not enrolled in school. It was not grades. It was not that they could not speak English. It was not even the cost of going to college, although that was an important part of explaining why they aren't in school. It was their need to support family. But I want to point out something about the need to support family. That's an important part of the story, but unfortunately I don't think our question was as sharp as it could have been, because I don't know what that means. What does it mean, need to support family? It could mean, and in doing focus groups, it meant, a lot of times it meant this. They themselves had a young family, and so they were starting out in life, and they had to raise their, or help out with their young family. It could mean that they had to go home in order to help their parents, both with financial issues or household issues, or perhaps the health of a parent. These were all things that might be part of that reason why they say, I need to support family. Nonetheless, that was the number one reason that they gave to us for not being in school. All right, let's see. Okay, this is all, okay. Yep, this is all messed up. My apologies, folks. We're just going to keep going. So that was some of the work that we have done with regards to young Latinos in the U.S. When we took a look at them, education is important, but there were some reasons why they were a little bit behind with regards to their education. Now, another part of the story that I wanted to talk to you about today was about educational attainment. So when we look at educational attainment among people ages 30 to 34, so this is among young Latinos ages 30 to 34, you'll see that 36% of that age group of young Latinos do not have a high school diploma. About 9% have a bachelor's degree, 3% have completed a master's or professional degree, and less than 1%, that's why it says 0, it's actually 0.4%, have a PhD at age 30 to 34. When we compare that to the general population, you'll see that for the general population, 21% of young people, 30 to 34, actually have a bachelor's degree. And this is based off of data from the 2009 American Community Survey, so the most recent data that we have available. So when we talk about young Latinos on educational attainment, they're a little bit behind the general population of young people in the U.S. I wanted to show you a few other characteristics of Latino, not only those who have generally the educational attainment of young Latinos generally, but also wanted to show you some characteristics of the Latino labor force. So when we take a look at Latinos in the labor force, you can see that for the most part, most Latino workers are young. And Latinos represent about 20% of the labor force between the ages of 25 and 34. They represent about 14% of the entire labor force overall. So a relatively young labor force. But when we take a look at their education, sort of people, in terms of the labor force, all people with a graduate degree, for example, what share are Latino? Only 4.5%. Among those who have less than a high school degree who are working, 40% are of Hispanic background. So when we talk about Hispanic workers, when we talk about those who are actually in the labor force, you'll notice that Latinos are less educated, Latino workers are less educated than the general U.S. population. A lot of this has to do with those who are immigrants. Immigrants who completed all the education in their countries that they have come from. Nonetheless, when they come to the United States, they have less education than we might have expected of somebody that same age, yet they completed all the education they needed to back in their home country. Now, the post-secondary pipeline. I want to show you what's going on with the trends here in terms of the post-secondary pipeline. And these numbers are taken from the Department of Education. What this shows you is the number of BA degrees, bachelor's degrees, conferred between 1977 and 2008. You'll notice that the majority of degrees conferred are conferred to white, non-Hispanic students in the U.S. And Hispanics are somewhere down here in this bottom. But it's probably better to blow up that last part so you can at least see what the numbers look like for the bottom. As you'll notice, the trend is up. More young Latinos, more minority students are getting bachelor's degrees. So that over the last few years, we have seen those numbers rise. So that today, there's about, in 2008, there were about 100,000, 110,000 bachelor's degrees conferred nationwide, according to the Department of Education, to Latinos. However, when we talk about sort of the share of all degrees, you'll see that Latinos only represent about 8% of all the bachelor's degrees conferred in 2008. And among those Latinos, you'll notice that young Latinas are dominating the numbers. They represent 70% of all the degrees awarded in the United States to Latinos. So 70% of all the degrees awarded to Latinos in 2008 were to young female Hispanics. So what's been the story on master's degrees? Well, a similar story, somewhat of an increase. You notice the numbers, of course, are a lot lower because not every student goes for a master's degree. But you'll see that Latinos are down here somewhere in the bottom. But when you take a look at this blue line, the blue line is non-resident alien students, in other words, foreign students. And when we take a look at blowing up that bottom part, you'll see here that going through the 90s into the 2000s, you'll see that Latinos are the bottom line here, but that they're kind of matching their Asian American counterparts, and there's about 30,000 or so masters that were awarded to Latinos in 2008. Again, the trend is up, but that's largely because there's just more Latinos. So when you have more Latinos, you're going to have more of them going, even if all the probabilities of succeeding in making it through a bachelor's program into a master's program, if all those probabilities remain the same, if there are more people, you're going to have more degrees awarded, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. Now, in terms of the composition, you'll see that Latinos represent about 6% of all of the master's degrees awarded in 2008, and again, female Hispanics were getting more of those degrees, about 2/3 of them, than males. But notice that the gap is closing a little bit. Now, what about doctoral degrees? When we talk about doctoral degrees, we're talking about small numbers. The numbers are relatively low, and you can see that the numbers have been somewhat flat over the years, but you'll notice that the non-resident alien numbers are actually a larger share now than they were among master's or among bachelor's degrees. That's no surprise, that's what one would expect. But when we blow it up for the Latinos, African Americans, and Asian, you'll see here are the numbers over the last few years. So as we're looking at these numbers, you'll see that the Hispanic numbers are really quite low, around 2,000 PhDs awarded in 2008, and that the non-resident alien PhD numbers have been rising. What do they represent? About 3.6% of all doctoral degrees conferred in 2008 were conferred to Hispanics, and when we talk about breaking that up, you'll notice that the gap between males and females has somewhat diminished. It's more even here when we talk about the doctoral degrees, but it's very, very few doctoral degrees. Now, one of the interesting things here is to think about this as a cohort. Now, I don't have good data to follow a cohort, so I've kind of created what we call a synthetic cohort. So I took, for example, high school graduates in 1999. In 1999, nationally, how many of those high school graduates actually then enrolled in college? And all numbers here are in thousands. So you can see that between graduating from high school and enrolling in college, there's a little bit of a drop-off. No surprise, it's what we normally expect. Then how many actually 4 years later completed a degree? Now this is not exactly following a cohort again. This is a synthetic cohort, and I'm just sort of thinking, well, what would the numbers be 4 years later? What about by the master's degree level? It's giving them another 3 years, and then by the doctoral level, another 2 years beyond that. And you'll see how the pipeline starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. There are fewer people at each and every level who are completing these degrees. But what do these numbers look like for Latinos? Well, here are the numbers for Latinos. So there are about 329,000 high school graduates who were Latino in 1999, and as you move along, you'll notice how the numbers drop off quite a lot in terms of the raw numbers. So that's actually not that big of a surprise, because frankly, when we take the 2 and divide it by the 329, that looks very similar to what you see from the previous chart for all versus PhDs overall. Nonetheless, for Latinos, there are relatively very few Latinos who make it to the bachelor's degree level and then ultimately to graduate school. I want to close by telling you a story about the demographics of the United States and some of the changes that are happening in the U.S. Now, when we talk about the Latino population, and actually this number of 48 million is probably going to change come Thursday, because the Census Bureau will publish the final state counts for New York and the District of Columbia on Thursday, and we will finally know how many Latinos there are in the U.S. But as of 2009, there were an estimated 48 million Hispanics in the U.S. That number has tripled since 1980, and it's actually accounted for half of the growth in this decade. So Latino population growth has accounted for half of the nation's population growth overall. We project at the Pew Hispanic Center that the number of Hispanics in the U.S. will triple again by 2050, and that they will actually be twice their share of the U.S. population today by 2050. A lot of the growth of the Latino population has been driven by immigration. Up through the 90s, immigration was the primary driver. However, in this decade, it's been native-born births that have been driving the numbers. So native-born births now exceed immigration in terms of contributing to Hispanic population growth. And it's not only in California, it's not only in Texas, it's actually nationwide now. So there's been a dispersion of the Hispanic population across the country. Now here's the trend in terms of Hispanic population growth through 2010, and here's what we project will happen through 2050. When we talk about the population today, you'll see that Hispanics are about 16% of the U.S. population. However, you'll notice that that population is majority native-born. I will say, though, among adults, it's majority foreign-born. But when you take into account everybody, it's majority native-born. Here's what we project will happen to population shares moving through 2050. You'll see the Hispanic population share will grow to be about 29% of the nation's population by 2050. And when we talk about how young the Latino population is, its median age is 26. For whites, it's more like 42. So Latinos are very young. But it's really the native-born who are the young people. Their median age is more like 14. So when you talk about the Hispanic population, you'll see the adult population is more foreign-born. In fact, you look at just the foreign-born, of course, it's mostly adults. But the native-born are very young. A lot of second-generation young people. In fact, we call it the rise of the second generation. And the second generation among Latinos, that is, young people born in the U.S. with at least one parent who is foreign-born, that group is now the single largest group of young people ages 16 to 25. Just 10 years ago, it was the third generation that was the largest group. So as we move forward in time, this experience, both with immigration and also parents who themselves are immigrants, is becoming a bigger part of the experience of young Latinos. Now, where are Hispanics in the U.S.? Well, this is 1980, so here's a map showing you where Hispanics were in 1980. As you can see, largely concentrated along the border. The darker the county, the greater the share Hispanic. In fact, the darkest counties, the dark purple, are places that are 25% or more Hispanic. Watch what happens as we move through the decades. So here's 1990, there's 2000, and there's 2008. So that now you have population centers for Latinos in places like Atlanta, in Chicago, in the upper Midwest, and not only in New York, but all up and down the East Coast, in South Carolina. So you've got a dispersion of the Hispanic population across the country. In fact, there are now 446 counties that are at least 15% Hispanic. A little side note, it looks like virtually every county in the country has had its Hispanic population increase between 2000 and 2010, with the exception of one major county, and that's Arlington County near Washington, D.C. If you're familiar with Washington, D.C., 10 years ago, 20 years ago, Arlington County was a vibrant Latino community. But as the county has become more expensive, many Latinos have left, and actually Arlington County had a decrease in its Hispanic population. It's really quite interesting if you think about it. One of the few places in the country where that's happened. Now, where has the growth happened? Well, this is a map that shows you between 1990 and 2000 where some of the fastest Hispanic population growth happened. The darker the county, the faster the growth. You'll see Central Florida, you'll see Dallas, you'll see North Carolina. In fact, we used to, at the time, call North Carolina a new destination state. But today, it's an old new destination state. Because if you take a look at what's happened between 2000 and 2008, it's, again, not only has the population dispersed, but growth has dispersed all around the country, even Alaska. If you look at Alaska, there's also population growth in the Hispanic population there as well. In terms of public schools, as I mentioned to you, 1 in 5 of public school students in the U.S. is Hispanic. And Hispanics have represented a large share of that growth in the number of students in public schools. Half of all Hispanic students are in 2 states, California and Texas. And about half of all Hispanics are actually in California and Texas. And did you know, as a little side note, that there are more Latinos in LA County than in every state with the exception of Texas? There's about 4.7 million Latinos in LA County alone, and that's actually more than the entire state of Florida has. So we're talking about Latinos. California and Texas dominate the numbers. And about 34%, about a third of Hispanic students in U.S. public schools have parents without a high school diploma. Where are Latino public school students? This is a map that sort of shows you where some of the biggest concentrations are, and it's in the places you would expect, the states with large Hispanic population.